This is North Dakota Legislative Review. I'm Dave Thompson. Thanks for joining us today. Our first guest of the 2017 legislative session, the House Majority Leader, Al Carlson of Fargo. Representative Carlson, thank you for being here.
Absolutely. It's good to be back and talking legislative action again.
And this is going to be a different session than we've seen over the last few because you've got some challenges ahead.
You know, I always tell people that it's easier to govern when you have less money because the word no comes out a little quicker. But this is going to be a whole session about prioritizing our dollars. And we're going to try and do, quite honestly, what the new governor campaigned on, and that's to right-size government and downsize government. And we're in agreement with that it's time. We have had quite a run of expansion in the state. We've had a lot of one-time expenditures. Those things aren't going to happen this time. There's just not going to be revenue there for that.
Now, looking at the budget situation, I think in an earlier interview you said North Dakota's not broke, but there's belt tightening that has to be done this time.
Absolutely. We're not broke. We're still collecting $4.5 billion worth of revenue. That's a lot of revenue. And what we need to do as we look at our whole revenue picture is decide what kind of revenues that we have that are ongoing so that we're not moving and spending money this time, counting on it on general government, and then have it not be able to be replaced in the next biennium. So there's a lot of moving parts to this budget. We'll get it figured out, but it is going to require belt tightening on the agency parts.
So it's a lot more work for the appropriations committees.
You know, they're working hard at it. And this time we changed our budget format so we have a legislative budget, and then any changes to that, it's a baseline budget. Again, it's one of those things that the governor campaigned on, was a baseline budget. We have that. The baseline is the starting point is after we've had all of our allotments. That's the starting point for our budget, and anything changed or add will have to be an amendment to that budget. It's the right way to do business. I'm glad we're doing it, and I think in the end it's going to make it a lot easier for everybody to understand when you're talking where you were at and what you changed up or down.
And this is all going to meld into your priorities.
Absolutely, and the priorities are, you know, that we've always had in North Dakota since statehood. There's been a strong commitment to public education. Now the commitment is, and I do honestly think, Dave, that there's going to have to be some serious belt tightening in higher education. There is a lot of concern there by the higher ed institutions, but the point is that's one of the areas we have to take a look at, because we have gone from 54% funding of the cost of the share of K-12 education to 82%, and we're going to continue to keep that. Now, are there going to be significant increases in the per pupil payments and the formula? No. But are we going to do everything we can to hold that even? And the superintendents I've talked to and we've talked to are okay with that. Because we don't want this again to transfer to the case where it becomes a higher property tax on the people back home. But there's only so much money in the pot. You know, you have the most needy of the needy to take care of. You know, those who cannot take care of themselves, we have an obligation to help with that. Those who can, we do not. But those that cannot, we will prioritize that. Public safety is always a big item. And like I tell everybody, the 8s make up the budget. Educate, medicate, and incarcerate. And that's about 80% of the budget. And when they're gone, there's not a lot of real extra money. If you took a 10% reduction in every other budget, you could probably only round up $70 million. So, and $70 million isn't going to help you when our deficit is a little bit hard to define today, but it could be $400 million compared to our revenue that we expect to take in, our transfers to the dollars we're going to spend. And that's real money. And we've got to go out and find that and still fund our priorities. Because we will not do two things, Dave. We will not bond, and we will not raise taxes.
You say you won't do those two things, but former Governor Dalrymple had mentioned a couple of things. Number one, taking some money out of the profits of the Bank of North Dakota to the tune of $200 million. Yay or nay?
Well, we're going to take some money out of the bank. We've already taken $100 million. And for the last 4 bienniums, we've left the profits in the bank to build the base of the bank. We'd like to see, or the House for sure, and we're in discussion with the Senate at all times, we'd like to see about $125 million instead of $200 million. Because once you throw that into the mix, you're saying you're going to take $125 million every biennium. And once you do that, you better be prepared to make sure that that money is there. And if you take 200, I'm not so sure it would be there next time. And what we can't do is build a budget that's not sustainable with our revenues in the next biennium.
And I'm thinking the Bank of North Dakota is doing very well right now, but things are cyclical, and who knows what's going to happen.
Well, and we're an ag, a commodity-based state, ag and oil, and coal and those kind of things. And that you've got to be very careful in a commodity-based economy. We've seen what happens when oil prices go down, and we lose, a couple billion dollars basically in sales tax revenue over what you anticipated. That's real money. So you've got to be careful on a commodity-based market, and the ag prices, even though the crops in most cases were pretty good, the prices were not. So they need big crops to pay off their lines of credit and to stay in business, and that doesn't leave a lot of profit that is collecting taxes on and extra spending.
And it's also a potential gamble in a way, because you never know what the weather's going to do. If all of a sudden North Dakota goes into drought, it becomes a more serious problem.
Yeah, and then this winter we've got extraordinary expenses on snow removal. So these counties are facing an increasingly tightened budget, just like we are, and then their expenses haven't gone down. So there's a lot of challenges, but those challenges can create opportunities. It can force us to look at the way we provide government to the citizens. And we've heard a lot from the governor in terms of general statements. We haven't heard a lot of specifics yet. But on the other hand, he's been on the job a month. I mean, I can't expect him to digest a $13 billion budget in a month. We had the same situation when I came in, and Ed Schaefer was there, and we had George Sinner's budget. It's a transition period. We're going to continue doing our business. We're going to lay out our priorities as a legislature, and as the governor starts to feed you things in, hopefully they mesh real well with that.
If I remember correctly, after George Sinner left office and Ed Schaefer took over, Schaefer did have a budget address later on, which was a little bit unusual. Am I correct in that?
Well, I recollect him talking about his budget priorities, and I remember at that point in time the Senate was Democrat, the House was Republican controlled, and it was kind of an interesting session as a freshman, because whatever we passed they tried to kill, and whatever they passed we tried to kill, and we didn't make a lot of headway. But in the end, we did end up working off of Schaefer's priorities.
It always comes down to that, because you've got a constitutional responsibility to balance budgets.
Yep. And it's our job. There's only one branch of government that can spend money or pass laws, and that's us. And we need to sharpen our pencil. We need to make sure we do the job that's been given to us, and we will.
I haven't heard a lot of talk recently about maybe using the earnings from the Legacy Fund, which was a possibility that was raised a couple of times. What's going to happen there, do you think?
There's about $160 million that can be transferred over and the constitutional measure does say that the earnings shall be transferred to the general fund after the given date, which would be 2017. And right now it looks like we're going to have to do that. I would have preferred not, because I think that that's a future fund, and it should have been used for special projects, special things to help build the future of the state. But I'm not so sure that we're going to be able to not address that this time by taking some of that to the general fund.
Okay. Well, since you talked about priorities, and we've mentioned K-12, I understand property tax has been kind of a priority, but it's an interesting relationship that the legislature has with property tax. You don't levy property taxes except for the 1% for the medical school, yet we've looked to the legislature to kind of solve the property tax dilemma.
We first of all started with a crazy income tax formula that somehow your income tax was tied to the property tax relief. And then we moved into the funding of K-12 education and saying that when we give you this money, you have to lower your mills to this level. That has worked fairly well, but now we have switched it all to the general fund, saying this is our commitment to K-12 education. It's about 84% of the cost of K-12 education. So, and then we have this 12% buy down, and obviously that's a $300 million pool of money sitting there that everybody wants. The governor dissolved that and put that into the general fund. I'm willing to discuss the usage of that $300 million as long as we get property tax reform. And if you remember the governor's speech, he spent a lot of time talking about property tax reform. I have a property tax reform bill. It's rather complicated. You and I can talk about that at a future time when I introduce it. But it's time. It's time for us to get out of the business, as long as we reform and engage the voters back home to be involved in the budgets at the local subdivision level.
Yeah, reform has been talked about more now, And you started talking about that 2 years ago.
Yep.
We heard some things about reform. There were some, I guess you could call it baby steps toward reform.
They were tweaks, is all
They
they
were
were.
tweaks.
Yeah, they
But
didn't
now
do
you-
much.
Now you're talking about something that really has to have some major changes.
Well, there's going to be a whole lot of people from the political subdivisions come in and scream foul, but it's going to put the burden back on them, and it's going to start removing the state from a tax that we do not either assess or collect.
Yeah. What about the plan that was talked about, that was forwarded in to have the state take over social service funding?
You know, I'm not a supporter of that because there's too many loopholes. I don't think it's the right time to do that. They were not going to be our employees. They were still going to be county employees. There was going to be hold harmlesses to counties that didn't get as much as they should have, and other counties were getting more than they should have. So there was a lot, in my opinion, a lot of flaws in that bill, even though they thought it was a perfect solution. The governor was really bought into it, Governor Dalrymple. And I don't support it. I don't think it's the right time, it's the right place, because I'm convinced. We took over the judges a number of years ago, and that was going to save a lot of tax money, and there would be lower property taxes at home, and I want you to show me where that's at, because the answer is it's not there.
There are a lot of, as you mentioned, moving parts to this budget. Here's an oddball question. How do you keep all these things straight?
You know, there's some really good people that we have up in our legislative council staff. Our fiscal analysts are all CPAs, and they understand the budget inside and out. I'm not sure how they sleep at night trying to figure it all out, but they do. Plus, we have Representative Delzer, who I consider just to be a genius on the budget, and he does an excellent job. And his other chairman, you know, Representative Pollard, Representative Brandenburg, and let me say, I'm forgetting one of my subsections, Pollard, Brandenburg, and Munson do an excellent job. Those guys really dig into these budgets, and they know it. And any good leader will rely on smart people and surround himself with those to make sure that he's getting the good advice and he's getting the good, accurate figures. And they have a real handle on it. Are they scratching their head this year? Absolutely, because the numbers don't match. And it's going to take some serious work between the House and the Senate to make those numbers balance at the end of the session without raising taxes.
Since you talked about committee structure, something really interesting has happened this year, because you have a super majority of Republicans in both the House and Senate. We've had less Democrats on committees, and then you've had leadership people who have had to step into committees. As a matter of fact, in the House, the minority leader, Cory Mock, is on 2 committees. In the Senate, the minority leader is on 1 committee.
Yep.
And, you know, looking down the road, when you get to conference committees, is that going to be an issue?
No, it's not, because if you look at the conference committee rules, it never has required a minority party member to be part of it. It's always been a courtesy. We'll attempt to extend that courtesy wherever possible, but when it comes to moving the session along, if their people are stretched too thin because there's so few of them, we will add our other people, and obviously they have to support they had to have supported the bill as it goes forward in conference committees, and if they didn't support it, they weren't going to be on it anyway. So if the 2 of them, on our committees, we have 2 Democrats on each committee, and we have between 12 and 13 Republicans on each committee. So we'll move the process. It's all about moving the process along. We'll try and include them wherever possible.
Still looking to hope for a 70-day session?
You know, a 70-day session would be good, Dave, and it'd be good for a couple reasons. Number one, it keeps us really focused on what we're doing. But number 2, with a new administration that's completely different than what we have, the affordable, not so affordable Care Act will be up for review. It's on the news today that they're discussing what to do with it and what are you going to replace it with, because that has a tremendous effect on even things like Medicaid expansion in North Dakota. So we want to leave some days. The Waters of the USA, the Clean Air Act, to say just a few, are things that could be changed drastically in the EPA rulings coming out. We need time, if we have to come back and react to those.
And the way things are moving, there's been a lot of talk about repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. And then, of course, that's Medicaid expansion. But if that happens simultaneously, it may not happen tomorrow. It might happen.
It'll more than likely happen when we're not in session. And we're anticipating that. It's kind of like the DAPL situation down south. We know that the state has committed a lot of money to pay for that because of the public safety of our people, and our law enforcement is important to us. But it's a federal obligation. And there could be a time when we need to do something to make sure we get all those dollars back, because right now we're $25 million into it. $25 million in a short budget is not a good thing. So we're going to keep our eye on that as well, and we're going to do whatever we can to keep the pressure on Senators Hoeven and Heitkamp and Representative Kramer to have something that's a federal issue on federal land be paid for by them, and they actually even should be sending law enforcement officers in to help us.
But do you need a deficiency appropriation bill to cover the shortfall for the time being and hope for reimbursement, or tie it to some
What
kind
we're
of
going to do,
reimbursement mechanism?
I want to do, and I've expressed that interest to most everybody, or that opinion, is that we need to have, it's a loan at the Bank of North Dakota, and we're going to leave that loan set on the books. It's going to run up some interest, but we're going to leave that loan set on the books until we get reimbursed, or until there's a solution that says we won't help.
What's the interest rate on that?
Couple percent. I mean, it's very low.
It's low, but
it's very
still
low,
it's an interest
but
rate.
it still adds up. It'd be a lot cheaper than if the federal government charged you a penalty on your income tax. We told them we could match that if they wanted to pay us more.
So, what do you think about the whole DAPL situation? As we brought that up, now that things have seemed to quiet down, the chairman out there is saying that people should leave, but there's still some uncertainty out there, and there's still costs piling up for law enforcement. What's your take on this?
Well, you've got to remember that a majority of the people left are eco-terrorists. They're not normal Native Americans that say they want to protect their water, and I respect their opinion for that. I'll always defend the right for peaceful protest. Burning bridges, burning cars, slashing tires, harassing ranchers are not peaceful protest type things. It's very disappointing. I know those people are very upset that are living out in that area when they've got to have sheriff's patrol cars following school buses to get the kids in that area to school. There's something wrong. They're illegally on private land. They've been illegally on Corps land, and the state has stood up because we want to protect the groups I mentioned, the law enforcement and the people that live there. I'm very disappointed in the leadership at Standing Rock to come now and expect us to be happy about the fact they asked them to leave. That should have been done 150 days ago when they were on the wrong land.
And they were on Corps land.
Yeah, absolutely. They were on private land to begin with.
Private land to begin with.
They moved back to Corps land, and they're not supposed to. If you and I camped on Corps land today, they'd come out and move us.
And this is all, weighing the budget decisions. It has to be. And you coming in before this protest thing really blew up, with knowledge that things had slowed down, especially in agriculture and oil. And so this all is a milieu that we haven't seen for a long time.
Yep, and it was not anticipated. And we, like everybody else, I was one that thought this might last for a week or two and it'd go away. Well, there's still between 300 and 700 people out there. And when the day comes that President Trump says, you have my permission, the permit is reissued to drill underneath the river, there's going to be, in my opinion, an issue that we'll have to deal with.
Absolutely. Since we're talking about that and some of the other issues that are going on, do you have any other priorities outside of the budget that you're particularly looking at?
Well, there's always issues that you look at. First, the budget's always first and foremost because that's where the dollars are and that's where the programs are. But it's how you, when you're looking at the measures that pass, we need to do some real cleanup on the marijuana measure. We don't want to deny the people what they thought they were getting and that was some type of medicine for someone with a long-term chronic pain disease, or a little Janie who has seizures that's 6 years old, and they believe this will help. But it's going to be regulated, it's going to be safe, and it's going to be well monitored from seed to distribution when we get done. And we are going to do a bill. Right now we put a bill in and put a hold on anything because they're asking for permits. The law went into effect 30 days after the election. That's a big issue. That's one of the issues. We need to look at school funding because we had the people voted for the Foundation Aid Stabilization Funds for the use of that money, and we're going to do the right thing with that. But again, that's a budget item, but it's a big deal that the people spoke on and told us we wanted to use this for education, and we're going to do it.
What about Marcy's Law?
Marcy's Law is a wild card, Dave, because they're still analyzing, and the counties are still trying to figure out what it's going to cost them, and if victims' rights were really helped or hurt directly by this. I personally am disappointed when out-of-state interests come in and buy elections in our state, and whether or not, obviously it passed. It's a very emotional issue, and it passed. I think that we've got to be very careful on initiated measures so that we won't have outside interests hijacking our state and our policies.
Interesting you brought that up because there's going to be a hearing this week on a bill that would create a separate commission to look at initiated measures, referred measures, what's working, what isn't working. There's some suspicion of the people who like to circulate these things, saying it's just the legislature trying to raise the number of signatures required, et cetera. So what about that?
Well, I think I supported a measure last time, put a measure in that there had to be geographically distributed, so you couldn't go to West Acres or you couldn't go to the state fair and get all the signatures you want on an issue. And when it is a statewide issue, I don't know that that's the right answer, but I do know we need to look at how the process is handled and how the process is improved. Do we want to take away that privilege of the citizens? No, we don't. But it needs to be a North Dakota-driven initiative, not somebody else's.
Got to go back to the budget for a second because something popped into my mind. We talk about the March revenue forecast all the time, how important that is, and I think it probably is that much more important this time.
Absolutely. I think that as hard as we work this down, and I've got a bill in it that's going to create a legislative revenue forecast system that we continually do every biennium, that we're engaged in that. We've got to be careful the way we do it because it hasn't been working. It's been very inaccurate, and the changes have been legislative in the last 2 bienniums. But the March one is the last snapshot we get after crossover and prior to the final ink being put on our budget. It's very important. Our attempt this time was to get as absolute close as possible with the first one so that we don't have that major drop again after the second, because last time we had another big drop in March that made it very hard. Our whole second half was scrambling trying to figure out how to fill the difference because we'd already been appropriating budgets as we went. So we've got some work to do there, and it's very important to have it.
Would that indicate that appropriations bills are going to be the last things done?
Well, they will be, unless it's a pretty minor, they will be the last thing out. And that's the way it should be. And what we've encouraged our caucus to do is to not to put in a lot of extra bills with spending in them, because there is just not a lot of room for new initiatives. And I've kind of challenged them, said, if you want to spend some money, you find out tell me where you're getting it. You go out and find it somewhere, and if it makes sense, we can look at it. But if not, there's not room for a lot of new initiatives this time. We're examining exemptions. Are they cost effective? Do they have a cost-benefit analysis that returns money? Because of giving this break, do we get more money back in the future? And you're going to see a tax day at the legislature pretty soon where a lot of those bills that went through the interim committee are going to come up with either being removed as an exemption or being changed or reduced as an exemption.
So is that going to be done in one day, you think?
We're going to try and run, it might take 2 days, but in the House we're going to run, there could be 8 or 10 bills in a row that deal with these various exemptions. Everything is on the table, whether it be for wind power or angel funds or the Renaissance Zone. There's all kinds of things that will be addressed in those. And we're going to have to look at them because there's a lot of ways to increase revenue in the budget. One of them is taxes, which we're not doing. The other way is to not be giving away tax incentives and have that go back into the pool of money that we spend.
A couple other issues I wanted to mention real briefly. One is that the idea of putting 2 legislators on the investment board. That bill is in. What do you think about that particular?
I don't have really an opinion either way. I think that if we are in charge of something, we should have involvement in it. I mean, I'll always defend the legislative branch of government. If, in fact, we are given the responsibility to watch over it, it's the same as the PERS board. We put people on, but they're still dominated by the people receiving the benefits. And I'm going to work hard to see if I can get that changed because we're responsible for that as legislators in the end. And input is good, but at the end, the final responsibility on all these things still lie upon us to do it.
The PERS board, are you thinking about adding more legislators because there were 2 put on, or what's going to happen?
You have to wait and see what comes up.
Okay.
It's one of those that
will do.
It's in discussion, and I just believe that if we are responsible, it's not responsible to allow an unelected board to sign a contract and commit the state to $21 million of expenditures without our input. That's just wrong, and I think it should be changed.
Well, speaking of that, since state employees were part of the equation because of the insurance plan, state employees no raises this time.
There's probably going to be a policy across the board, Dave, of 0 and 0. And we're going to try and hold as many people harmless as possible. K-12 is no different. we're going to probably not have any increases, but we're not going to have decreases for them either in their pupil payments.
Yeah.
And that's important that we make sure that we maintain what we can, and that goes with the DD providers. That goes with all the other areas where there's automatic increases that we've tried to not do over the years, and then review them on a biennial basis. So it's not going to happen. It's going to be. I just do not see where that's going to be coming from.
In the few seconds we have left, how many days for the session?
I'm hoping that we're done in 70 days, which would put us in about the 15th to the 20th of April.
And then if you need to come back and address Medicaid expansion, you can do that.
Yes, and there could be other issues, but that would probably the biggest one would be how we handle the repeal of PPACA. The Affordable Care Act, I've always said it's named wrong. It's not so affordable, and we should have the option as a state to not be mandated on that, and we should have the choice like we always did before to run our programs.
Well, thank you very much. The half hour has gone by real fast.
It always does. I'd be glad to come back when we get into the second half and talk about where these initiatives have gone to.
I'll take you up on that.
Sounds good. Thank you, David.
Our guest, Al Carlson, the House Majority Leader. For Prairie Public and Legislative Review, I'm Dave Thompson.